Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. I don't know about you guys, but for me, September honestly just flew by, and it's time to do my September wrap up and talk about the 17 books that I read last month. So, not quite as good of a reading month as August, but honestly, 17 I feel like is still towards the higher end of my average. So, I'm still incredibly happy to have gotten 17 books done. So let's talk about everything that I got to in September. So I want to start by just recapping the books that we picked using the TBR jar for my September TBR. So the physical books that we selected using the TBR jar were This Will Be Fun, Razorblade Tears, Legends and Lattes, Belladonna, and The Warm Hands of Ghost. And then in addition to these books that were on my physical TBR, I also carried over 3 books from August, which were On Mystic Lake, Wild Love, and The House on the Cerulean Sea. And then in addition to these physical books, I also had Blood Over Brighthaven and One Day Everyone Will Have Been Against This on there from my Kindle TBR. So just to recap the ones that I did not get to, I didn't get a chance to read The House on the Cerulean Sea, Wild Love, or On Mystic Lake. And I recently talked a little bit about these in a video that I posted trying to finish my September TBR before the end of the month. And I honestly just feel like out of these 3, the only one that I'm really interested in reading right now is going to be The House on the Cerulean Sea. The other 2 feel a little bit more summery to me, so I'm just going to set them aside to get shuffled back onto my TBR cart when the summer comes back around. I also did not get to either of the Kindle books that were on my TBR for September, unfortunately. I am really excited to read both of those, but between arcs that I needed to catch up on and Libby holds, I kind of just got caught up and didn't make time for them. So I really want to be more intentional moving forward and stop requesting so many books on Libby, and if the holds do come up, either suspend them or just revisit them later, because I really want to get to the books that are on my physical TBR. So I'm going to try to do better with that in October. And then the last book that I didn't get to was This Will Be Fun, which I am moving this one over to October because I still really, really want to read this. So I am planning to get to this soon. It's not officially on my October TBR, but in my mind, it's on my October TBR. But that means we can very quickly talk about the books that I did get to. So these are featured in that vlog that I just mentioned. So if you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts about them, I would recommend to go watch that. But I'll give you a quick overview for each. So I did finish Belladonna, and I rated this 4.25 stars. I was really enjoying the pace of this and the overall story. I did have some moments of kind of questioning the relationship and where things were headed that's featured in this book, and I started to slow down a little bit after the halfway point, but fortunately, towards the end of the book, the pace picked back up for me and I was reinvested in the story. And I do already have the second book, so I'm really excited to get to that. So this was a good, solid 4.25-star read. I also read Legends and Lattes, which I ended up rating 4 stars. I thought this was really fun. It was super cute and cozy, and I enjoyed it. But I do think that I would have enjoyed it more if I saved it a little bit more for the winter months. So maybe in November or December, I will visit the second book in this series, but I did enjoy this overall. And as a quick little side note, I did finish Razorblade Tears, but I technically finished it after the start of October, so we're not going to talk about this one until my October wrap up. And lastly, for my September TBR, I did get to The Warm Hands of Ghost, and I ultimately rated this one 4 stars. I really liked this book, and I will say it is one of the few historical fiction books that I have read about World War I. So I appreciate that Catherine Arden wanted to highlight that more because I don't feel like it gets a lot of attention, but I really just wanted more from this. I mentioned in my previous video that I really liked her other trilogy that I read, and I feel like this story also would have benefited from being a little bit longer, but overall, not a bad read. I still really enjoy her writing. I just wanted a little more from it. So that covers the books that were on my September TBR, but let's take a look at the other books that I managed to read in September. And I'm just going to start from the beginning of the month and work my way through each book that I read. So the first book that I finished this month was It's Not Summer Without You, which is the second book in the Summer I Turned Pretty series. And I've been reading these as audiobooks on Libby because I wasn't familiar with the series before, but I've been seeing that the series is getting a lot of buzz on TV. I personally haven't watched it yet, but I did want to know what all the hype was about, and someone I know in person recommended the books to me, so I've been picking these up when they're available on Libby. And I rated the second audiobook 4 stars, but overall, I'm not feeling super attached to the books or the characters right now, so I'll be really interested to see how I feel once I finish the third book in the series. And the second book that I finished this month was Local Woman Missing. I ended up rating this book 4 stars, and I enjoyed the book, but I did kind of see the ending coming, which is always difficult for me with reading thrillers. I feel like I tend to figure out where the story's going to go before it's kind of revealed in the book, but I thought the overall concept was pretty interesting, and the reasons that one thing led to another were really interesting to follow along with. I remember reading this super, super quickly, so I was definitely heavily invested in the book. But now that I'm reflecting on it about a month later, I feel like I probably rated it a little too high because I don't feel like it really stuck with me. But I remember thinking it was fine for a thriller. So I would recommend it, but I don't think that it would have a lasting impact on someone who read it. And now we get into the territory of books that I am super excited to talk about because I had some 5 star reads. So the next thing that I read was Dawn by Octavia Butler, and I am so excited to continue this series. Based on this one book alone, I think Octavia Butler is going to very quickly become one of my favorite authors. I absolutely loved this, and I thought it explored concepts that were so interesting. The way that this took a look at humanity and the way that people have relationships with each other, and kind of what's right and wrong and what it means to be connected with other people, whether in your species or not. I just overall thought that this book was really, really amazing. And I love a good sci fi. So I really feel like this book has just been a hidden gem for me. I can't believe that I haven't read any Octavia Butler before, but I can promise you that that is definitely going to change now. This was a 5 star read for me, and I honestly already want to reread it. So I know that this is going to stay a 5 star, honestly, like 6 star read for me for a very long time, but I'm very excited to continue this series and continue to share with you how I'm liking it. And the next book that I finished was Annihilation, and I am so happy that I picked this up and read it. It was available as a skip the line copy on Libby, and I had never really heard of this book or this author. And these actually are new editions that are being released for the 10th anniversary of this book. So I kind of feel like I've been living under a rock because I had never heard of these. But I picked this up on a whim. And again, it absolutely was amazing. This was a 5 star read for me. This definitely had a lot of that sci fi aspect to it as well, but there was a lot of horror in this one, which is my favorite genre of horror. So I'm excited to continue this as well. And up next, I had a reread that was pretty nostalgic for me. So I reread Wicked. I previously read this when I was a teenager, and yes, there are some parts of this that are a little uncomfortable, a little spooky scary. It's definitely not as kid friendly as the musical has been made to be, but this was a book that I read a long time ago and fell in love with, and so I wanted to reread this since the movie has come out based on the musical, and I really wanted to revisit this book so that I could remind myself of some of the differences between the book and the musical, because I was initially a fan of the musical when I was younger, and then I found out that it was a book, and I've always been a pretty big reader, so of course, naturally, I had to pick the book up. but I wanted to revisit this and really be able to have a fresh comparison in my mind. Technically, I rated this 5 stars, but it was a reread for me, and I know that I love this story. So I don't really feel like it's fair to say that it's a 5 star read because just based on nostalgia, it's always going to be 5 stars for me. But just very happy to have reread this and gotten to experience this book again. And after that, I picked up another book on Libby that was available because it was a skip the line copy. So I read the audiobook for The Lost Apothecary, and I ended up rating this book 3.5 stars. I didn't dislike it, but again, it just wasn't really memorable for me. I felt like the story started off with making some really, really great points, but it didn't end up being as impactful as I had hoped that it would be. So I was a little disappointed with the outcome of the book, but overall, I thought it was fine. I don't really have too many thoughts or feelings on that one. I liked initially how we were following a couple of different timelines in parallel, and how one timeline was kind of unpacking and discovering the mysteries of the other timeline, and then that would be paired with a chapter from the past that kind of shared more of what was going on. But ultimately, I just wasn't super thrilled with where things ended up. So, not a bad book, just not my favorite. And the next book that I read was The Fury. And I actually picked this up because one of my book clubs was reading this. And I previously read The Silent Patient and I really enjoyed it, although I did find it a little bit predictable. But this one, honestly, I cannot say the same about. Not in the sense that it wasn't predictable. It was definitely predictable, but in the sense that I did not enjoy this one as much as I enjoyed that one. And I felt really bad because in the author's note, the author talks about how he didn't really plot out how this book was going to go over time. He didn't flesh it out as much as he had with his other 2 books, and he really enjoyed the writing process for this one. But I felt like that decision really showed in the way that this book was laid out and the way that it was written. And I feel like that lent itself to the book being a little bit easier to predict and a little less enjoyable to read. So I felt really bad that the reason I didn't enjoy it was the thing that the author enjoyed the most about the writing experience for this book. But honestly, this one just wasn't his strongest work for me. So I think if you wanted to pick up one of his books, I would recommend a different one. But I ended up rating this 3.5 stars. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever read, but I'm definitely going to unhaul it, and I probably wouldn't recommend it over his other books. After I finished that book, I picked up Pantomime by L.R. Lamb, which I did cover in my Catching Up on My ARCs vlog. So I had 3 advanced reader copies that were provided to me by NetGalley that I needed to get to in September, and Pantomime was the first of those that I chose to read. I've previously read Dragonfall and Emberclaw by L.R. Lamb, so I was really excited to read this book. And Pantomime is part of a trilogy that L.R. Lamb is revising and re releasing. So I really enjoyed getting to pick this up. I really, really enjoyed this book. I thought the characters were super interesting. I mentioned in my previous vlog that Pantomime follows an intersex character that's trying to really discover who they are. And I found that storyline to be super compelling, and I found it really interesting how it was paired with some aspects of magic throughout the book. So I am really excited to see where that goes in the other 2 books in this series. The second one is about to be re released soon, so I will definitely be picking that up. I will say my only kind of qualm with this book was that I did feel like it was almost just a book that was entirely exposition for where the story is going to go, because it's obvious that a lot is about to be revealed in the second book, or at least it seems that way from where the first book left off. So I really feel like the story was just picking up momentum at the end, and now I have to read the next book to really understand where the story is going to go. So that was my only complaint, was that I don't really know if they can stand alone super well, but I am excited to continue to read the trilogy. And I did rate that one 4 stars overall. Up next, thanks to Libby, I was able to read a book that has been on my wish list for a long time, but that I don't personally own a copy of, and that's Blue Sisters. This book has really been circulating a lot. I feel like I've seen a lot of people mention this book. I feel like I've seen this book everywhere. So I've definitely been curious about this book and I always eye it when I go to Barnes. And so it was available on Libby and I just decided to pick it up. And Blue Sisters follows the lives of three sisters after their fourth sister has passed away. And it covers how they're all coping with that and coming to terms with it, and also rediscovering their relationships with one another in the wake of this loss. And I really thought that this story was so beautifully crafted. I thought it was incredibly well done and it felt so real and raw. There were multiple moments that made me feel emotional, and I felt like the ending of the book was really beautiful. So I did rate that 4.5 stars overall. Up next, I picked up The Last Thing He Told Me on a whim. I was feeling a lot of thrillers this month, if you can't tell. So anytime I saw that they were available on Libby, I was just scooping them up and listening to them, especially if they were available on audiobook, because a lot of the books that I wanted to read this month were physical books, but I always like to have an audiobook that I'm in the process of listening to. So Libby was really filling that need for me this month. But with The Last Thing He Told Me, I felt like the story was interesting, but again, it just wasn't really memorable. Unfortunately, I just felt like this one was pretty repetitive. I wasn't overly invested in the characters, and I felt like it was, again, very predictable. I also didn't find the ending to be all that satisfying, and I felt like the steps that we had to take to get to where the book ended were a little bit frustrating at times. I felt very frustrated with the characters and the way that people were acting and the choices that were being made throughout the book. So it just, it was another thriller that's probably not going to stick with me. I probably won't remember it all that much by the time I've finished the year and read a bunch more books. And so I did rate this one 3.75 stars. And to be honest with you, in retrospect, I can't tell you what made this one 3.75 versus The Fury being 3.5. I think my choice to listen to this as an audiobook definitely enhanced my experience because I didn't feel that the writing was great, but because I was listening to it, I could overlook that a little bit versus having to physically read it. So I think if we continue with that comparison between The Fury and this book, I physically read The Fury, and so I found that more frustrating because I was having to go through the repetitiveness and feeling like, ugh, I just want this to be over, versus The Last Thing He Told Me, I was listening to the audiobook. And so some of those writing techniques that may have bothered me in a physical book didn't bother me as badly because someone else was reading it to me. So I think I felt like this concept was a little more interesting than some of the other thrillers that I had read this month. At least it felt like it was a little bit more unique. So that may be where it got a couple bonus points for me, but overall, it was just another basic thriller, not really something that I plan to revisit in the future. And then I had my most frustrating read of the month by far, which was Remember Where You've Buried the Bodies. And I talked about this a lot in my ARC reading vlog, so I'm not going to sit here and complain about it ad infinitum at this time, but I will just say that it was a 2-star read for me. And as far as disappointing thrillers goes, this definitely makes the top of the list for me in terms of all the books that I read this month, which is so disappointing because I was really excited for this book based on the premise and the synopsis that was given on NetGalley. I actually requested this one because it sounded really interesting to me, and the execution just fell extremely flat, and I felt like I was really struggling to get through it, but I didn't want to DNF because I had been given an ARC copy. So unfortunately, just not an enjoyable read for me, and I definitely feel like it earned that 2-star. Fortunately, after that 2-star, I did get to follow that up with 2 5-star reads. I feel like my reading month was such a roller coaster, very high highs and some low lows. But unfortunately, I just felt like I was hitting dud after dud with the thrillers I was reading in September. But the next book that I finished was Tender is the Flesh. And if you have heard anything about this book, you've probably heard that this is a horror novel about cannibalism and a society where humans are treated as cattle. And I would say that those things are true, but I would also say that this book is so much more than that. And I love a book that just makes you think so much. And I think the commentary that this book is making is so, so well done. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this. It definitely hurt my feelings a little bit in some places, but I really enjoyed this and I really want to reread this and fully annotate it. It's a pretty short book, so I definitely think that is something I will be doing in the future. I thought this book was so, so interesting, and I found out that in Argentina, this is actually required reading for some schools, which I think is amazing. I know that the meat industry is a really, really big industry in Argentina, but I honestly wish that more schools were requiring people to read this because I think that this has some great things to say. And I wish more people had read it because I think it is just so much more than a horror novel, which is how it was honestly marketed to me. And that's all I thought I was getting out of this. So this was a really pleasant surprise to read. Now, it is gross. I'm going to tell you right now. There are things in this book that will make you uncomfortable, but I think that that's a good thing, that you will be uncomfortable with them. So I would highly recommend this, and it was by far a 5-star read for me. And we are almost to the end of the 17 books that I read. So after I finished Tender is the Flesh, I read the second book in the series for the Three Body Problem, which is called The Dark Forest. I think the series as a whole is actually called Remembrance of the Earth's Past, which is really interesting, but this was another 5-star read for me. I really enjoyed The Three Body Problem. Again, sci-fi seems to be hitting it out of the park for me. I thought the first book, although it was a little strange in places, was so interesting, and I really enjoyed the speculative nature of that book. It really made me think a lot, and I would say that the second book was no exception to that. I felt like when the book started off, I was a little bit jarred and confused because things were changing pretty quickly from the first book. But once I got back into it and I understood where we were picking up, it made perfect sense. And I really enjoyed watching this unfold from start to finish. And the 17th book that I finished was Caraval. So I've had this on my physical TBR for quite a long time, and I actually have the second book as well. And I've heard lots of people talk about how much they love Caraval, so I was pretty excited to read this. Um, but I feel a little bit lied to. I fear that the internet may have overhyped this just a little bit, which probably contributed to the rating that I ended up giving this book. But overall, I just found some of the characters, especially our main character, a little bit annoying in this. And it it's unfortunate because I felt like the setup was really interesting, but then I just felt like all of the characters were kind of shallow or they acted really immature, and I didn't love the overall story. I felt like initially I was really interested, but sometimes this happens with books where there's multiple trials where I just feel like it gets a little bit redundant. It just feels like the pacing of the book is very cyclic, and so I think this kind of suffered from that. I was just getting kind of bored with doing the repeated trials and watching our main character try to piece together those trials and figure out the puzzle pieces was getting a little bit annoying just because, again, she was being a little bit immature. But I will say, I believe this is meant to be YA and it definitely reads as a YA book. And I really just think that I'm probably aging out of reading YA. Some YA books I can still read and really enjoy. A great example of that would be A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I really enjoyed that and it was a quick, easy read. But sometimes I feel like easy also translates to dumbed down a little bit. And I think that those two things do not have to be the case. Like they don't have to be synonymous with one another. So unfortunately, I was just left feeling that this was a little bit too young for me, but I didn't hate it. So I want to preface by saying all of those critiques aside, I didn't hate this. It just didn't really live up to the hype of what I've heard about it. And I did end up rating this 3.5 stars. It wasn't bad, but I don't think that it's going to be an all-time favorite series for me. I do already have the second book, so I probably will go ahead and read that before I unhaul anything. I don't want to unhaul this until I give the second book a try. I feel like it's probably still going to feel very YA to me, but I want to commit to it because I didn't hate this and I am a little bit curious to see where it goes. So I'll at least start the second book, and if I'm really not enjoying it, then I'll probably just DNF and unhaul these. But I want to give it a good, honest try because I didn't hate this first one. I just wish it had been a little bit better. But that covers everything that I read in September. I honestly can't believe that out of 17 books, I actually had physical copies of this many of them because I feel like that never happens. But I honestly feel like this was a pretty good reading month overall. I had several five-star reads, and everything except for one book was over 3 stars. So I feel like overall, a lot of these reads were still really good. I'm hoping that in October, more of the books that I read will feel more memorable to me because unfortunately, I feel like almost all of the thrillers that I read this month were not memorable or they were memorable for the wrong reasons. But I'm really wanting to read more thrillers and horrors for October, of course, for spooky season. So fingers crossed that things improve a little bit. But let me know what your favorite book was that you got to in September down in the comments. I would say that Dawn was probably my absolute favorite this month, but honestly, any of the five-star reads that I had this month are up there and they're all top contenders for me. So let me know if you had any five-star reads or a favorite in the month of September. And thank you so much for watching my September reading wrap up. I can't wait to see you next month and talk about all the books that I got to in October. Have a good one. Bye.